There was a time when the world knew her simply as a bright smile on television, a teenage girl navigating middle school chaos with animated thoughts floating beside her. And that girl was Hilary Duff, but what the world didn't see was the pressure behind that smile, the weight of early fame, the constant expectation to remain frozen in the image of innocence long after childhood had ended. And before she became a global household name through Lizzie McGuire, she was just a young girl with big dreams, fierce determination, and a mother who believed in her so deeply that she was willing to move cities to make those dreams possible. And that kind of belief becomes fuel, the kind that pushes a child into audition rooms where rejection becomes normal and success feels like a distant echo. But Hilary did not break under rejection. She learned from it. She sharpened herself. She grew thicker skin, and when opportunity finally knocked, she was ready not just to step in, but to own it. And when Lizzie McGuire exploded into a cultural phenomenon, it wasn't just a show, it was a generational mirror. Millions of young girls saw themselves in her awkwardness, her insecurity, her hope. And suddenly Hilary was not just acting, she was representing adolescence itself, which sounds beautiful until you realize how heavy it is to carry the identity of an entire generation on your teenage shoulders. And then came the music, albums that climbed charts, tours filled with screaming fans, red carpets flashing endlessly. And in the early 2000s, her name stood alongside the most powerful teen stars in entertainment. Yet fame is rarely gentle. It magnifies everything, every mistake, every rumor, every relationship. And growing up publicly means your heartbreak becomes headlines and your growth becomes gossip. And through all of it, she learned something most people learn much later in life. That survival in entertainment requires reinvention, not rebellion, but evolution. Not destruction, but expansion. And as the Disney era slowly faded, she made a choice that many child stars struggle to make. She chose not to chase the ghost of who she used to be, but to build who she was becoming. She stepped away when needed. She explored different roles. She allowed herself to mature without apology. And that decision, quiet yet powerful, is what separates temporary fame from lasting presence. Because anyone can shine for a moment, but only the resilient can sustain relevance across decades. And Hilary understood that reinvention is not about abandoning your past, but integrating it, honoring the girl who started it all while refusing to be trapped by her. And so she stepped into adulthood with courage, embracing more complex roles, navigating motherhood, balancing career and personal life in an industry that rarely allows women to age without criticism. And still, she stood firm, unshaken by the noise, grounded by priorities that had shifted from validation to fulfillment. And this is where her story transforms from celebrity biography to inspiration, because success is not measured by applause but by alignment, by waking up knowing you are living authentically rather than performing endlessly. And as years passed, she proved that longevity is built on self-awareness, on understanding when to pause, when to pivot, and when to protect your peace. And in a world addicted to instant fame, she became an example of steady growth, of quiet power, of resilience that does not scream but sustains. And what makes her journey powerful is not just the heights she reached, but the transitions she survived, the identity shifts she navigated, the courage it takes to outgrow an era that defined you. And many people fear reinvention because it feels like starting over, but she showed that reinvention is refinement. It is stepping into rooms as a more evolved version of yourself. And that mindset is what allowed her to remain relevant, not as a memory, but as a presence, not as nostalgia, but as now. And her story whispers something important to anyone chasing dreams. Your first chapter does not have to be your final identity. And no matter how early you peak, you can always rise again differently, deeper, wiser, stronger. And that truth is what turns a childhood star into a lasting force. Part 2. As adulthood unfolded, Hilary Duff stepped into a phase of life that many celebrities fear because it requires vulnerability over image, authenticity over perfection, and in this stage she began choosing projects that reflected growth rather than expectation, proving once again that evolution is not accidental but intentional. And when she embraced roles that portrayed mature women navigating career, relationships, and self-discovery, audiences saw not a former teen idol trying to stay relevant, but A woman comfortable in her own skin, and comfort in self is the ultimate success. Because fame without identity is hollow, but identity without fame is powerful. And she chose power, she chose family, she chose motherhood not as a pause in ambition, but as an expansion of purpose, demonstrating that success is not linear and that stepping back does not mean stepping down. And through interviews in public appearances, she carried a calm confidence, no longer seeking to prove herself to critics who once doubted her ability to transition beyond Disney. And that calmness is earned. It is built from surviving scrutiny, from understanding that public opinion shifts like seasons, but inner conviction must remain steady. And in an industry where many burn out, she balanced her roles with discipline and grace, reminding the world that sustainability requires boundaries. And perhaps the most inspiring element of her journey is her refusal to let the narrative of child star define her adulthood. She rewrote the narrative through consistency, professionalism, and quiet resilience. And this is a lesson for anyone who feels labeled by their past, because labels are temporary, but growth is permanent if you commit to it. And even when projects did not become blockbusters or albums did not dominate charts like before, she did not collapse under comparison. She adapted. She understood that different seasons bring different forms of success. And maturity means recognizing that value is not tied to trending moments but to lasting impact. And over time, audiences began to appreciate not just her talent but her transparency, her openness about challenges, about balancing work and motherhood, about evolving priorities, and in that honesty lies relatability, because perfection isolates but vulnerability connects, and connection is the real currency of influence. And what makes her story rank high, not just in search engines but in inspiration, is this consistent theme of reinvention without losing essence, of ambition without arrogance, of fame without forgetting humility. And as years continue to pass, her name still sparks recognition, still carries warmth, still holds respect, and that is not accidental. It is built from decades of choosing growth over comfort, resilience over retreat, authenticity over artificial shine. And if there is one powerful message hidden inside her journey, it is this: you are allowed to evolve beyond the version of yourself the world first fell in love with. You are allowed to become more complex, more layered, more grounded. And you do not owe the world a frozen image of who you once were. You owe yourself the courage to keep becoming. And Hilary Duff's life stands as proof that reinvention is not a risk, but a requirement for longevity, that resilience is more glamorous than perfection, and that true success is not about staying the same, but about growing boldly in front of the world without losing yourself in the process. Time has a way of revealing who was built for a moment and who was built for a lifetime. And as the years continued to unfold, Hilary Duff proved again and again that she was never meant to be just a nostalgic memory from the early 2000s, but a living example of evolution in motion. Because after conquering television as the unforgettable face of Lizzie McGuire and navigating the intense spotlight that comes with childhood fame, she entered an era where her power became quieter yet stronger, less about proving and more about purpose. And that shift is where real transformation lives. Because when applause fades and headlines slow down, what remains is character, discipline, and self-awareness. And Hilary leaned into that stage with maturity that can only come from surviving public scrutiny while growing up in front of millions. And instead of clinging to the past, she embraced roles that reflected modern womanhood, including her successful return to television through Younger, where audiences witnessed not a former teen idol trying to relive glory, but a confident actress embodying complexity, humor, and ambition. And that performance alone sent a powerful message to the industry: that reinvention is not about erasing your origins, but expanding beyond them. And expansion requires courage because it demands that you outgrow comfort zones, challenge public perception, and trust that your authenticity will resonate even if it looks different from before. And throughout this period, she balanced career with motherhood, redefining what success looks like for women in entertainment, showing that ambition and family are not opposites, but parallel strengths. And in interviews, her tone shifted from youthful excitement to grounded wisdom, reflecting a woman who had learned that longevity depends on balance. not burnout, and perhaps the most inspiring aspect of her journey is how she normalized growth without drama, how she transitioned phases without scandal-driven reinvention, how she allowed herself to age gracefully in an industry obsessed with eternal youth